Hi, back again. Time to do another live stream. I thought that Halloween, a topic on Halloween would be a sensible thing to do. I took a long time to prepare this material. It took me a long time to sort of pull it all together. And cool, blimey, you guys have been chatting away while waiting. Okay, so you'll find that the start time for this video will be included down in the description later on when YouTube decides to publish it. But I do make all of my live streams unlisted, so unless you have subscribed to my channel, hit the bell button to be notified, and also got notifications turned on, then you won't actually be able to access the live streams. So just make sure you've done that. All of my patrons get access to the unlisted live streams. I do that later on, make sure they get access to those. There will be an edited version of this live stream released a little bit later. It usually takes me a couple of days to make that happen, but yes, it will come out eventually if you can't stay for the whole live stream. But it will not include the Q&A or questions and answers at the end of the presentation for any of you who are interested in that sort of thing. Okay, now normally if you haven't been part of my live streams, what I tend to do, since the sound seems to be working fine, is I will present everything first. And then once I've presented everything to you first, I then open up for questions and answers at the end. That means you will see my face at the beginning of the video right now and at the end during the Q&A, but I will probably be using some slides. It just makes life easier for me so that I can focus on what I'm saying rather than you trying to look at the camera and click through my images at the same time. There would be a lot of pauses otherwise, so that's why I tend to do it that way. Okay, so Halloween's pretty close, so let's get started, and I'll slide over to here and we'll get ourselves ready, and let's talk about making stuff scary. Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Mostly I'm talking about Dungeons & Dragons 5e, but this can be applied to other versions of Dungeons & Dragons and possibly other types of role-play games if you're interested in that sort of thing. The topic for today is how to make your Halloween Dungeons & Dragons game session or Dungeons & Dragons scary. My biggest issue with doing a video on this topic is it's one of the most difficult things to do. So Dungeons & Dragons 5e in particular makes it difficult. So even though I will explain how to go about making and running your Dungeons & Dragons game session and making it scary, that's not going to make it easier for you, because it is in fact incredibly difficult to do well and successfully. And it will take a lot of practice, and you will have to use multiple techniques. So when I talk about the stuff in this video, don't focus on one aspect. You have to use the full package. If you don't use the full package, you really don't have a hope. It's just the truth as far as I'm concerned. I found it very difficult to do myself. It took a lot of practice. Okay, so number one, Dungeon Masters. I want you to slow down your description and your speech and the way that you talk. Now, don't go down so slow that the players are sort of waiting for the next word to come out. But often what I would do is I would say a short sentence and then allow for myself to breathe. I wouldn't rush through the description, and most of my descriptions and anything I said was very short. So I was looking at about maybe 2 or 3 very short sentences, and then I would stop and I would speak in a slower pace or and cadence than normal. You'll notice that I'm kind of doing that right now, but that's still quite fast. You don't have to go down to a complete snail pace. That's the only thing I would say. Okay, all right, so next thing. Allow for pauses in your description. This creates tension. You still plan to actually speak and answer questions, but by pausing and waiting, you're forcing your players to listen, and also they're waiting for that answer. So pauses are good. They help create tension in the body, and therefore I encourage you to do so. It will also allow you time to breathe and suck in the air and to think, because one of the things you'll find when you're running a horror or a scary Dungeons & Dragons session is that you have to have time to process. Therefore, pauses are your friend, so use them. I know Dungeons and Dragons is very much a combat-focused game system, but you need to run less combat. One of the things that will wreak tension and really make it very difficult to make a Dungeons and Dragons adventure scary and horrific in any way is by running lots of combat. So you need to trim that back. Either trim it back, or things that were going to be a combat scenario, turn them into something else, okay? Because it will wreck it. You're falling into the trap that most players will start to pursue, and that is, well, all I need to do is use my special class features and my race features and my spells, blast this monster or creature or whatever it is, or this threat, destroy it, knock down its hit points, and collect its treasure. And that's the last thing you want them to be thinking. So don't do that sort of thing if you can help it. One of my favourite movies in terms of horror is the original Blob movie with Steve McQueen. And one of the things that this illustrates is that make sure to present monsters that are much more powerful than the party can manage. Fair and balanced encounters suck for being scary and running a Halloween encounter or game session for Dungeons and Dragons. So make sure that the monster is far more powerful than the party. They can't just lay into it in a combat encounter or the first time they meet it and beat it. That's not going to work. Okay, so avoid that sort of thing. You need to present something far more powerful than the party. Don't avoid character death. Now, I don't mean go out of your way to kill characters, and I'm not talking about players, I'm talking about characters, but you don't want to avoid it. If it comes up, let it play out, okay? What you've got to understand is the players' characters, they're not superheroes anymore, they are the victims. That's why when you watch a horror or a scary movie or read a scary story or a horror story of some kind, a lot of the main characters, whether they be classified as the main characters or minor characters such as an NPC or non-player character, a lot of them perish or die during that story. So try to understand that you want them to understand they are the victim now. They are not going to find this easy, so that's really important. Players need to sometimes know what they're going to do if their character dies. So I would have a discussion in session 0 or just before your session if you don't have time for a session, particularly if you're just doing a one-shot, because the worst thing you can do is have one of the player's characters die early on in your game session and they have nothing to do. So figure out what they're going to do, whether they're going to play another NPC that you have included in the adventure, or maybe their character will die but will continue to play in some way. And I've talked about how to do this many times before, character death options, but there's something horrible happening to their character, or their character is a ghost and therefore it can't do quite the same sort of things they were doing before. One of the worst things you can do when you're running a scary or horrific Dungeons and Dragons session is to have a high turnover of characters. So if a player winds up losing a character and that character dies and they bring in another character, then the fear of death is gone. So death is not the worst thing that can happen in Dungeons and Dragons and the session you're running for Halloween. Okay, that's what I want to make clear to you, that don't avoid it, but it's not the worst thing that you can do as a dungeon master when you're running the game. Death in Dungeons and Dragons is quite common, whether it be a player character, but usually it's the monsters that die quite easily. They're not usually sort of hard to kill or anything like that, and then of course the looting process continues. One of the good examples of how to make death in Dungeons and Dragons unusual and strange is the original Alien movie. Now, when it came out, the idea of something ripping through your chest that had infested you and basically was growing inside you was really quite horrible for a lot of people to watch. And it's one of the greatest alien horror scary movies out there. So I would highly recommend coming up with some unusual ways of dealing with how your NPCs and a player character might actually go about dying in your game should that come up. And by all means, you should definitely have some non-player characters who die. They are there as cannon fodder. And of course, there are lots of different ways of running a campaign or a one-shot for Halloween, but I would go with the unusual and the strange when it comes to any kind of death in your game. Alright, so the next aspect is, let's look at some of the ways that are really terrifying in terms of death in your game. There are ways that death can occur that make a big difference in increasing or rising the player tension. And there are 3 that I can think of right off the top of my head, 5 which I will provide. The first one is infestation. The Alien movie is a good example. Something infests you, the slard, that frog creature, that can infest you with a tadpole, and there's something growing inside you, and it's not easy to get rid of. Infestation could be something like rot grubs. There's lots of different things and creatures that do this sort of thing. So infestation is one of the worst ways because you can drag it out. It might be a long process that takes a while, or it might be a quick process depending on who's infested and how you want to play it out. Transformation. One of the best ways you can scare somebody is to use slow transformation. Something's occurred to a non-player character or a character and they're slowly transforming. Ultimately what it means is, it might not mean death, but it will be the erasing of their character's mind. Their personality, whatever makes them them, will be gone once this transformation is complete. So another way of dealing with that, impregnating, so something impregnates a non-player character or one of the characters within the story, and of course there's something growing inside. That's very much a lot like infestation, very similar in nature, but the only difference is that it's done through other means, if you know what I mean. One of the scariest concepts that you can apply in your game is the idea of being fed on or eaten alive. Now you can do this slowly or quickly. I think I would go with quickly when it comes to a non-player character, and with your player characters you want to do it slow. So you're creating a ticking clock that's working against them. Okay. The other thing is you want to be gross. Use gruesome descriptions in terms of any kind of death that occurs or any kind of thing that is dead in your game, because there will be a lot of dead things in your game if you're running a Halloween scary session, right? Okay, so when it comes to horror movies, we're usually talking about evil, and one of the best tools that evil has is infiltration, deception, and disguise. That is evil's true horror and tool, so utilize it. There are lots of things that can disguise themselves. A mimic can disguise itself as something else. But there's a thing called the yokel. It's basically a dripping mass that's yellow with a single eye, and it can disguise itself as something else, such as a drow or maybe a barmaid. Nothing worse than suddenly deciding to bed down the barmaid and it's not actually a barmaid. That would be pretty horrific in terms of my interpretation of playing the game, and you can utilize that kind of concept in your own game if you wanted to. So remember, infiltration, deception, and disguise. Whatever evil or monster it is won't present itself straight away. It's going to throw them down the wrong pathway. It's going to possibly try to assist them, but they don't know that they're chasing something that's right beside them. All of those things make really good tie-ins to making a really scary and horrible Dungeons & Dragons adventure. Now, Hansel and Gretel had the right idea, and as a dungeon master you should be doing pretty much the same sort of thing. Make sure to leave tracks and trails and clues and signs that are unclear in the origin. So when they're trying to figure out what the mystery is, or you're having a sort of more of a thriller where there's a bit of investigation required, you're not too sure what's causing the loss of people in a village or town, There is a mystery to be unwound, and usually there is some sort of mystery or secret to be discerned in some sort of scary or horrible story, right? So make sure to leave clues, tracks, trails, things like that. And these don't necessarily have to steer a player in the right direction. I know a lot of people think, well, all of these things should be directing them towards the completion of the overall story arc. But I wouldn't necessarily do something like that. What you want to do is create molehills out of small, unimportant items and details through their senses. One of the things you'll find is your players will often catch on or latch on to a completely unimportant fact or item and think it has more significance than it really does, and therefore play to that. You can use sight, smell, touch, sound, even the lack of sound or the lack of sight. So putting them in a dark environment is often a really good way of trying to make things scary. Now the problem I find with Dungeons and Dragons is most players don't really feel that's a big issue, because guess what? They all have dark vision, because literally almost every single race seems to have dark vision. So darkness is not necessarily useful to you unless it's magical darkness. Then you have eliminated their ability to see what's going on. So now they've got to rely on things like smell and touch and sound, and that makes things a lot scarier. So utilize that as well. Try to fabricate fake threats to distract your players' characters from the real threat. What you want to do is like a magician. You present one thing, but there's actually something else going on behind your back or up your sleeve. So you're doing the same thing as your magician. You are presenting one thing, but in fact something else is taking place. Make sure to exploit your players' real fears, not the player's character's fears, but the actual player. If you have any kind of knowledge of what they are scared of, those are useful to you. Make sure you've got a good relationship with them before you start doing this sort of thing. You don't want to traumatize them. You don't want to wind up with them freaking out so much they wind up leaving your table. This is a good time to start focusing on reading body language. Remember, majority of communication is not done through speech. It is done through how you move, where you put your eyes, facial expressions. So focus on your players' body language to figure out what you can get away with and what you can't get away with. One of the most frightening and chilling stories is The Shining. Now there's a book, there's a movie, and if you've ever watched the movie or read the book, you'll know it is a pretty scary story. So there are lots of ways of doing this, and the designer, the person who wrote this story, understood how people think, and he doesn't have the benefit of body language, so you have a lot more resources at your disposal. Now I know people are going to say, yeah, but Fred, I didn't do psychology and I don't really know how to read body language. You've been doing it from the day dot when you were born. Okay, from the very time you were born as a little baby, you've been reading people's body language from there. You might not think that you're very good at it, but that's not true. You are an expert. Maybe not trained, but you are an expert. One of the worst things you can do is show the monster too soon. Don't show your monsters or creatures too soon to the player's characters. Try to draw it out as long as you can. As I said, darkness, but the unknown is what makes things really scary. And if anybody remembers watching the movie Jaws, what made that particular story and movie so frightening is the fact that you don't see the shark. You know there is a shark, there's something below the water, but we don't see the shark too much later on. And that's what you should be doing, is make sure to leave your monster very much to near the end of the game session, or just draw it out as long as you possibly can. That will certainly improve the chance of your players actually getting frightened and scared. And that's what we're going for. We're going for an emotional response. Okay, so horrible and scary monsters don't make a scary adventure. Just because you picked a particular monster out of the monster manual or from popular culture or from myth does not make your adventure scary. It could help, but it won't necessarily solve all of your problems. Now I'll explain to you part of the issue behind that. And you'll notice that I haven't shown you a lot of the traditional scary things for Halloween. I haven't shown you ghosts, I haven't shown you vampires, werewolves, scarecrows, pumpkin heads, things like that. I haven't shown you those sorts of things because we are desensitized to those sorts of things. We are very much used to them, and therefore they don't really pose much of a scare factor for us. And your players will be going through the same sort of thing. So you're going to do a couple of different things to ensure that you are generating surprise and fear, and that is change your monsters. Use monsters in your game that you don't normally use, and there are plenty of different options. You can change the way they look, you can change their stat blocks. If you're using an existing monster, say you decide I definitely want to use a zombie, change the zombie stat block so it doesn't have the same statistical information on it. The problem is that a lot of people remember how those monsters work, and for something to be scary and frightening, you have to throw them a curveball. Okay, so the unexpected and the unknown, that's what truly makes something very, very frightening and scary. So change your monsters, change your stat blocks. When it comes to the main big bad villain or creature that you're going to present in your adventure, make your villain hard to kill. Make them hard to defeat, or have them come back. So killing them the first time didn't solve the problem. They need to seem invincible, certainly the first time that your players meet them with their characters. They are not invincible. Often what will take place with any kind of horror story or a scary story is that there's only a single factor or flaw that this monster or creature or villain has. And the players' characters are going to have to figure out what that flaw is to actually defeat the threat. And the Terminator movie is a good example. The burning robot. We see the burning robot. We see basically Arnold, he's driving the truck, he crashes after it's blown up, and there's a big ball of fire, and there's rubble, leftover bits from the truck, and we think that it's all over. The robot has been destroyed. The Terminator is gone. But then things move in the fire, and suddenly it reveals that there's no more flesh, and what was underneath, the true nature of this terrible threat, lies beneath the skin. You can use the same sort of concept in your own adventures when you're running Dungeons and Dragons. So the Terminator movie, I know a lot of people think it's an action movie, but the Terminator movie is a horror movie. And if you understand that, great. So what you're going to do is you're going to present a threat or villain who seems invincible, and they are going to have to figure out how to defeat this terrible threat. Okay, there are factors that come into play that are outside of your control, and without player buy-in, you are screwed. I hate to say it, that if you don't have players who want to be invested in a horror story and are showing up to play the murder hobo and kill monsters, and their first reaction is to get into combat and fight stuff and then take their stuff, it's probably not going to work very well. So make sure that you have a group of people who understand that they're playing in a horror story. And when I was running the Curse of Strahd, I explained to my players, look, don't expect me to be that nice, okay? Don't expect your character not to have some sort of horrible thing happen to them. Don't treat it like a normal Dungeons and Dragons vanilla adventure, because it's not. And so the same thing needs to apply when you're running your Halloween D&D session. Okay, the only way you need to get this to work is if you have player buy-in. Okay, so what do we do about some of the problematic behaviors that occur? Well, I'm going to talk about one only, simply because some of the other ones you just can't stop. Like I said, you're screwed if they just start doing that sort of thing. But if players use jokes, go off topic, make sort of side remarks, and you can tell they're really not immersed into the adventure and the story you're trying to tell, there's really nothing you can do to fix that. What you can try and do to alleviate the problem is this. Try to treat all of their jokes and off-topic comments as actual character dialogue in your adventure, no matter how ridiculous and stupid and out of the whole realm of your story and how out of character it seems, just respond to everything as if they talked in character and let it play out. What I'm trying to get you to do is, even if the players are going to break character and break the tension, don't let yourself go out of character. Stay in character the whole time, okay? And a lot of people will say, okay, so one of the greatest things you should do is add in dark humor or humor to break up the tension. That only is useful if you're running a very long session. And a better way to deal with that is actually to take a break rather than to use humor, because then you've got to circumvent what you've just done. You've just broken down what you've done, and then now you've got to build in another aspect to it that means you have to build up that tension again. So I suggest taking a break rather than using dark humor to sort of alleviate tension when you can see that the players are getting a bit tired. Okay, so don't break character, stay in character the whole time. What about some of the easy ways of dealing with making something scary and frightening? There are 3 different things that people will talk to you about which you can use. They are easy, they're not hard to do, you can do them. They do have some sort of effect on your game, but I will tell you now, they are not the most effective ways of developing that tension in your player. And that is to use low light in your game room. So turn down the lights. The problem with doing this is you can't read. So if you've got old eyes and you have trouble seeing the page and the print, that'll create a whole lot of other problems. So that means setting up candles and dimming the lights is all very well, but sometimes it doesn't work. But certainly that does help in terms of creating the mood. A lot of people will use music. I've used music before, and the right type of music as atmosphere in the background is great. You just have to be careful about how loud the music is, and you might find you need to be able to control the music volume. So there'll be times when you want to turn up the music, and other times when you want to turn it right down, particularly when you're trying to describe something or there's a lot of people talking. I know for me, since I have hearing damage, that if there's too many different sounds and noise going and taking place in a room, I can't decipher anything that's being said. So it can work, it can be very effective, but it will only work for some people. It doesn't work with everybody. Okay, so the last thing, if you're a particularly unusual dungeon master, really sick dungeon masters will go to extremes, which means they'll go and muck around with the air conditioning and turn the room temperature down. You can do this. That will certainly make your players colder and help build tension, because their body is trying to push blood through the veins to the rest of their limbs as you're freezing them to death. But yeah, and that certainly will help build tension and make your adventure scary. Those 3 techniques: low light, music, and dropping the room temperature. You can dress up your environment with props and so forth, but honestly, all of the other things that I talked about are far more useful to you when you're trying to be scary. What I want to make clear to everybody is that what you're essentially doing is, because Dungeons and Dragons is a mechanical game, it's very much a mechanical game, and you can take some of the mechanics out to make it a bit easier to run a scary or horrific adventure. What you're essentially trying to go for is when you're sitting around the campfire and you're telling ghost stories. Now, I'm sure you remember doing this as a kid, and you would sit around and you would tell ghost stories, and everybody was trying to scare and frighten everybody else, and we would tell stories about all sorts of things. It might be a ghost, it might be mad people who went off and did all sorts of horrible things to people. I remember the story that I remember the most is somebody who escaped from a mental asylum and took somebody's head off and was banging it on the roof of somebody's car. So those are the sorts of stories that we used to tell. So when you come to doing your dungeon mastering for this, try to think about, I'm sitting at the campfire, I've got the fire going, it's dark, it's late, and everybody's sort of wrapping up, trying to stay warm, and I'm telling a ghost story. That's essentially what you're trying to do. Now, if you found this useful, fantastic. I actually have many videos on the Curse of Strahd for the Dungeon Master if you're interested. Lots of additional advice on how to play the game for players and Dungeon Masters if you are interested as well. If you want to support the channel so I keep doing content like this, I have a Patreon page where you get access to the unlisted live streams and additional content that I make, and priority on the videos that I make as well. I also have a affiliate link to the book depository and Amazon down in the description. I get a small commission, you pay the same price. And I have a merchandise shelf under all of my videos as well if you want some merch. Make sure to share, like, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to be notified when I go live and when I publish new videos. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Okay, I'm not gone. I'm just grabbing my glasses. Let's see if this is a day where I need my glasses or not. And let's go to the chat and let's have a talk. Now, I'm sure there's going to be like a truckload of people with really good advice on how to do this sort of thing. I wouldn't consider myself an expert because I feel like running horror is one of the hardest things you can do as a Dungeon Master. And so everybody's going to continue to learn how to do it better. All right, but to the real extent, unfortunately, is that you really need players who will buy into the scary story concept. Are my eyes any good today? Is there a difference? There seems to be a slight difference. Prepared to Cook and Survive is here. Hi, how's it going? Epic Donut 1109. Hi, how's it going, mate? And then we're not going to worry about how the chicken got across the road. What else we got here? Anybody else that I've missed? I'm just checking through the comments really quickly. If you have any questions or feedback and you're worried that I might skip past you, the easiest way to make it stand out is to use a hashtag question or @Fred, and I'll notice it. Yeah, don't use knock knock jokes at your Halloween game session. Don't do it. Stay away. Don't do that one. Okay, who else we got here? Gosh, you guys were chatting for ages. Ages and ages. All right. And I'm scrolling down, and a frog with a flick. I don't know what that's all about. Okay, here we go. Kanoko's here. Waves, hi. Joe's here. Hi, how's it going? Yeah, Scary D&D. It's, to be honest, Dungeons and Dragons is not the best game system for trying to create something scary. It's really, really difficult to do, just because of the nature of the game, because so much of it revolves around deliberately engaging in combat, and you've got to do the absolute reverse and get your players to understand that engaging in combat is the worst thing they can do and the last thing they want to do, and they have to use their brain and try a different avenue. Rivers RPG channel, how's it going? Okay, what's here? Prepared to cook and survive, or is the Shining film a confession? Yeah. Yeah, look, I think The Shining is a really good example of telling a story and being scary. But like I said, what you're doing is essentially sitting around the campfire with a bunch of friends and telling a ghost story. So you do still use some of the techniques that they present in their stories. Jaws, Psycho, absolutely. Slice of Scott, they are great movies that you can study. What do you got here, Joe? Awesome advice. Don't show your monsters until you have to. I had a great session last weekend with brand new players. They loved it, and I can't wait to play again. Oh, that's good news. Excellent. Yeah, showing the monster too soon. Now, modern horror stories or modern horror movies and scary movies do the absolute reverse. They show the monster, it's gory, it's detailed, it's CGI, and they go with the quick scare, the jump scare. It's not really scary, that something just jumps out. Okay, and we've already seen CGI monsters before, so they've got to go to the more extreme by making them more gory and horrific to look at. And of course, horror and gore is part of that whole process. but they have lost the understanding of how to tell the story, and they've gone for just give them the monster, and we don't want to give them the monster. It is a strange and peculiar development in storytelling where you would think as our society progresses and advances, we would get better at doing things, and we've actually gotten worse. If you watch some of the older horror movies, they are still effective to this day to a large extent, and newer movies are not that effective. In fact, they will probably never show up on the top 10 best books or movies to watch or read with regard to being scary or horrible in any nature. What else we got here? Joe, love the game. Yes, Slice of Scott. I have the Crichton editor. Is that the Crichton edition of Kanoko to watch on Halloween? I'm not sure what that's all about. I'm not sure what that you're talking about. I'm going to skip past it. Okay, Slice of Scott. I use different playlists of music. Yes, adventure, crawl, combat. Specific playlists for roleplay encounters. Yes, that can work. I don't use music much anymore. I used to use music a lot when I first started out, and then I discovered that it was interfering with my ability to understand what other people were saying, and so I used different techniques instead and found they were just as effective, if not more effective, in fact. Okay, Pearshams here. Hi, how's it going? Just listen to Fred, get my weekly dose of D&D knowledge. If I've been helpful in some way, that's good news. Firelord Singer, how's it going? Slice of Scott, great Strahd videos. Wrapped up my 7-month campaign in Barovia last weekend. Okay, players killed poor Strahd. Now, one of the things with the Curse of Strahd is when the players start out, right, they are the victims. There's nothing that they can do that is going to really help them. As they get more powerful and learn more and develop and find out a bit more about his weaknesses and collect certain items and so forth, that changes everything, right? That's what I'm talking about. What you've got to go for is there's a lot of investigation and exploration and mystery to be solved with making a horror story or a scary story. You have to leave some unknown factors for them to discover. That's what the Curse of Strahd does. That's what all horror stories do, tend to, the good ones, and also, horror movies in general. And even books. Let's not forget the books. We still read books, right? Nathan, hi Nathan. My issue is timing. Would love to do a horror Halloween, but we are at the end of mines and meet up once a week. Yeah, totally understand. Yeah, and I think that you can run a Halloween or horror themed or scary game session. It doesn't have to be at Halloween. It doesn't have to be done at Halloween. It is just something that we tend to sort of focus on. In New Zealand, Halloween is not really a festival, a time. It's not something we celebrate. It's not something we have a lot to do with. It's very North American. And there are Old Hallows Eve and stuff like that do come from other cultures as well. But for New Zealand, my own culture, it's not a very strong thing. It's not something we sort of do. The only rationale behind it is to copy what Americans are doing for my country. So I would be happy to run that sort of thing at any time. Doesn't need to be during Halloween. Okay, Epic Donut, what do you got here? Hey Fred, thanks for the tips. I'm going to be playing a Lizardfolk Kensai monk that dual wields katanas and a longbow, and I wanted to know if you had any tips for playing one, as I've never have before. I don't have any advice specifically for playing a Lizardfolk Kensai monk. What I will say to you is the probably the key feature for the monk is the stunning strike. Okay, the stunning strike is really makes a big difference, because you can shut down a creature or a monster for a whole turn, and if you're in the right place in the initiative, it means that it allows the rest of your players to beat down on whatever you've struck and stunned if you are successful. But yes, that's the big play, is stun. Stunning a creature is pretty good. It gives you advantage on them, and there's not an awful lot they can do about it until they come around to where they are allowed to actually get rid of the feature. I mean, because Stunning Strike basically only lasts for a turn. Not a turn, no, a round. I believe it's a round. And there is, of course, a saving throw involved. But yes. I enjoy playing monks. I've had a lot of fun in the past. All right, Joe, what do you got here? I used an hourglass in my last session. Yes, hourglasses are good. It was a 3-minute timer. I used it when they were trying to make a decision. Yes, that's a really good advice, Joe. I've done the same thing. I actually forgot to write that down. I'm glad you mentioned it. Just a pity it doesn't go into the bulk of the presentation, because it'll get cut out when I do the edited version. Yes, timers are a good idea, Joe. You're absolutely right. I've done the same sort of thing. I will use real time, basically, as a timer for making decisions and taking action. And if they don't take those actions, there's a consequence, because what Joe's probably doing is 3-minute timer means if they don't do something or say they're going to do something in that time frame, something happens and that's it. So it pushes the tension, the real tension in terms of decision making. You might not be scaring them, but you're increasing their blood pressure and you're increasing their tension in their body as they have to work to a timer. And if half the battle is changing the chemistry in their body, if you can do that, you're doing well. I use it when they were trying to make decisions. Yeah, I used it for story. Sometimes I use it just to see them squirm. Yes, you can use the timer, and there's nothing related to the timer, but the players don't know that. The only problem with doing that is if you turn the timer over and you start it going, and they think something's going to happen once the timer runs out. You have to have something happen. It might not be very much. It might be you hear a squeaky floorboard, or you see a bird fly above, and they're like, is that all that is supposed to happen? The timer's run out, we didn't make a decision, and that's all that happened. There's got to be something more to it. So you've got to leave them guessing. Don't use that technique too much. Senpai noticed me. Oh, okay. The poor Kiwis don't have Halloween. Well, it's not. New Zealand is a very new country. We are a newer nation than the United States. We haven't been around that long, so we don't have a lot of those sorts of things taking place in our country. Persham, it lasts till the end of your next turn. Yes, that's right, till the end of your next turn. If I remember correctly, yes, I think that's correct. It's basically it lasts about a round. So it's important to make sure that you if you're going to use Stunning Strike, that you are in the right sort of initiative order. If you do Stunning Strike and the monster gets to act next, that's great, okay? Because then everybody else gets to follow up, and then your turn will roll round. But sometimes if initiative is not laid out the way you want it, it doesn't work to your advantage. What's that, Epic Donuts? In Curse of Strahd, did you add or subtract anything from the book? Yeah, I did. A lot. I've seen a lot of suggestions on revisions, and I was wondering if you changed anything. Yes, I did. I changed lots. Without giving away spoilers, for those of you who are freaking out that I might give away spoilers on the Curse of Strahd, I didn't take anything out of the adventure. I just put and squished in more. And because it's such a sandbox adventure, and I've already said that in the player guide, so it's not a spoiler, okay? Because it's such a sandbox, it's not like you don't have to improvise. You will have to sort of improvise, and so I would add new things to it every week. and I would twist things. So I might start with something and I would make adjustments to it. So I did that all the time. It's probably not appropriate for me to talk too much about that sort of thing because, one, off the top of my head, I would not be able to remember half the things that I've done, and I did a lot of different things. But yes, change as much as you feel you need to. And like I said, I just added more rather than took anything away. I often would add things that made things worse, but I don't mean character death. What I mean is I would add in like random encounters and things that would take place that increase tension, that would lead them down the garden path and have them really unsure. You know, my intention was to deliberately create player paralysis. Okay, I know I've got them. If they're starting to get into player paralysis, and the same thing applies to horror and scary D&D, if I can get player paralysis out of them, and then I start building in a physical timer, just as Joe talked about, like your egg timer or your hourglass timer or just your watch, you can just use your watch. If I build in a timer then, that makes it even worse for the players. And you will definitely start to get fear developing. Maybe not a lot, depends on the person, but certainly it's a really good technique. Like I said, start with trying to increase the tension in their body, and eventually it makes that much easier to get fear out of them and make them scared. Okay, what's this? Slice of Scott. I certainly did. Epic Donut. It's good to get your own fingerprints on it. Yes, make it your own. Even though it's a pre-published adventure, and this goes with any pre-published adventure, you should add things to it and make it your own. Prepared to cook and survive. Timer with a shrinking room like in the Star Wars. Yes, yep, absolutely, with the monster in the water. Exactly. You can build in timers into your game. You can build in physical timers for the players that are unrelated to the game. They're all techniques that you can use. But, I mean, I talked about a lot of things that are natural timers when I was talking about how to make things scary and horrific. And natural timers, as I said, things like infestation. So somebody getting infested and there's basically a timer going. They've only got a limited amount of time to deal with the problem and try to get the infestation out of the person, whether it be a character, a player character, or a non-player character. They've only got so much time before something terrible happens. And if you make that timer fast, increase the tension. Make it too fast and you're wasting your time in terms of trying to create tension in their body. If you make it slower, that can work a lot. That can work to your advantage. Set the timer at the pace you need. Things like transformation, so slowly transforming into something else. Often this is done through the concept of, bitten by a werewolf or a vampire, and they're slowly transforming into a werewolf or vampire. But there's really nothing scary or frightening about transforming your character into a vampire or a werewolf, other than you lose the character because the dungeon master decides you can't have control of it, or the dungeon master starts giving you advice on how to run the character and say you need to play this character as if they are an evil entity because they are now evil, because that's going to create a few problems. Certainly a way you can do it, but transformation that's slow, that can work to your advantage a lot as well. Something that's feeding on them and eating them slowly works really well. That's a natural timer you've built into your story. Those are the ones that I would go with the most. There are lots of other ways of doing it, and I feel like I've described most of them to some degree. I just need a drink of water. Okay, Epic Donut. Have you played or ran Waterdeep Dragon Heist? No. Saw you had a spoiler flip through, but nothing else about it on the channel. No, I haven't dungeon mastered for quite a while. My turn is coming up, coming to the end of our campaign. I've missed a lot of game sessions. We haven't been able to play because the dungeon master who's dungeon mastering our current campaign hasn't been able to run the game, or other people have gotten sick, or things have happened, and then of course I had the new job start and things like that. So we haven't finished it up. It's pretty close. but I will be running. I won't be necessarily running Waterdeep Dragon Heist. I'm probably going to run Dragon of Icespire Peak, along with I think Dungeon of the Mad Mage, because there's lots of variety for me. Okay, so that's my intention. But that's what I will present to my players, but I will also say, but I will do whatever you feel interested in, because there's no point running a campaign your players don't care about. And I know that they have no interest in giants, so I've got to stay away from anything related to giants. We've had giants up to here. Okay, what else we've got here? Oh, I look like we got somebody new in here. This is good news. I love it. Joe, I don't believe he has played it. Yeah, Epic. No, I haven't. All I did was a spoiler flip through, and I wouldn't do a video on that unless I had something to contribute that was from a perspective of experience. All I can say for those of you who want that sort of thing is approach some of the other channels, the bigger channels that are full-time or run a lot of the pre-published adventures, and see if they will do a video on that topic. It's a difficult one because usually once the product has been released, the interest in that product is lost, and therefore they might not do it because there's not going to be enough people watching it. So that's half your problem. But I would go and talk. I'm going to have a chat with Nerd Immersion. He's got a channel. He does a lot of live stream content on Twitch TV. He's probably run that adventure more than likely because he runs so many games, and see if he will produce some content for you on that particular adventure. I don't know if he will, but you can only ask. Yes, I have been drinking. Oh no, here we go. Schubert. I think I got it. Schubert. I've never run a horror game. My question, yes, is how do you keep a game scary and tense? Well, I just explained all of that. I had like 21 different points, and some of them were broken down into sort of subcategories. So I have kind of already explained all of that. The video will stay up and will be live for a little bit of time after I go, so you don't have to worry about that, okay? And the edited version will come out, and it'll have all that information in there. A big fan, hi Fred, big fan of your videos. I'm currently running a Lost Mine of Phandelver and using lots of your advice. Okay, good. I'm really glad to hear that. I'm glad it's been useful to you, Schubert. Schubert, I think it's Schubert. If I got your name wrong, I do apologise. How's the new job going, Fred? Pesham, as it happens, it's been rough. It's been a lot of stress. It's been freaking me out quite a lot, actually. So I can't really talk too much about it because of the contract that I signed, but essentially I am getting paid well. The hours aren't terrible. I have finally managed to sort out the jumping around of my shifts, and it looks like it's doing kind of what I wanted to do. So I really couldn't ask for much more right now. So things are looking good so far. Thank you for asking. Okay, so away from my job and back onto the topic of running scary games, or anything you want to talk about. As you know, during the Q&A, I will talk about anything you want to talk about. Not a problem. Big Kid. Hi, Big Kid. Just caught the end, so I guess I'll watch it later. Looking to do a Halloween one-shot for my family group. Yep. So Big Kid, I know you're a patron, so you'll find it will go up on the patron page probably in the next few hours, and it'll probably take me a couple of days for the edited version to come out. So yeah, you should be able to get access to that before you need to do any sort of major preparation. Pesham. Yes, I'm drinking. I'm drinking again. Kanoko. Fred, any adventure hooks relating specifically to horror? Okay. So when it comes to horror, there are only 3 major things that are taking place. Okay? And they are, because I wrote them down, escape. Your players' characters are trying to escape from something. It might be an environment, it might be from a creature, it might be from a supernatural event. So escape. The next one is trapped. Trapped is a horrible one because they're trying to escape, but they can't escape. So whereas the escape concept usually gives them a lot more space to roam. They can just keep running. And they will just move into a new location. So you have to have a very sandboxy map and location so they can travel some distance. But with trapped, you're putting them in a space that is not their natural environment. It's the natural environment of the threat, the creature, the monster, or whatever is trying to hunt them down. They are being hunted. Then there is the horror story. That is the kind of the reverse of those two, and that is the hunt. They're hunting for something. But the problem is with their hunting process is that initially they thought they were dealing with something that was easy to deal with. So it starts off as hunt, and then it turns into escape, okay? Because they come across it and find they are outmatched. So those are really the only three key stories that exist for horror. And if there are other types that I've missed, I'm sorry, but I think you will find that all of them are broken down historically into escape, the hunt, and trapped. Those are the basics. Anything around that. Sorry, I'm late. My first live stream. You don't have to be sorry at all. Don't worry about it. Sherbert. Yep. Thank you. So I did nail it. Good news. Excellent. Big kid. My niece is playing a rogue, and every time they need her to unlock a chest, she steals. Tried talking to her, and party is getting angry. Any ideas on how to handle this? Yeah, I do. You're not going to like it, though. Look, your niece is young, right? It is very hard to explain to somebody who's very young, and your niece is probably young, that you need to sort of be part of the party, play together, and you can't just do your own thing. So the first thing that is going to be your point of call is start introducing the mimic. Okay, if you've got treasure chests that need to be unlocked, she's got to start unlocking some treasure chests that are in fact disguised as a mimic, because that'll slow down her desire to try and take everything. Okay, so the mimic is there for a purpose. Now, I haven't said it, and I'm probably not going to go into a lot of detail, but and you'll have access to this pretty shortly, big kid. I am creating a new monster. It is the Elder Mimic, and it doesn't operate like the standard mimic in the Dungeons & Dragons monster manual for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. It's a very different mimic, and it will be much more frightening and be more effective than the one that you'll find in the general monster manual, because it can do a few other things. And I've removed some of the restrictions they had placed on the original mimic, so it's a bit more effective at what it needs to do. Okay? And I would suggest using that particular mimic, because the challenge rating hasn't changed. The only thing that's really changed is some of its features and stuff like that. But you'll understand more because I will post it on the Patreon page, okay? So you can use it. All right. Joe. A great scary monster is a Northic, like the one in Phandelver. Keep him hidden and get up out of your chair and actually whisper something from their character sheet in the ear. A definite scare. Okay, I didn't realize. If it works, then try it. I haven't really used the Northic to be scary. I've used other things. There are lots of monsters that can sort of read your mind and talk to you without using a mouth from a distance, and that can be quite frightening because you don't necessarily know what's going on. So yet again, remember, the unknown is scary. Epic Donut. Any ideas for one-shot adventures for people who have never played before? I was thinking escaping a bandit jail or being contracted to clear a dungeon. I was hoping for straightforward and drawing a hook. Oh, okay, I see. All right, Epic Donut. Well, I think you'll find that one of the best hooks for any adventure... Oops, I've just lost the connection. That looks like that's the end of that. I'm just going to check what's going on here. It says it's still going, but YouTube says I've lost you. So I think that's pretty much meant that I have to stop. Yes. An error occurred, learn more. I don't know what I can do about that. Maybe if I... You're still up. I'm still up. Okay. Oh, that's good news. All right. So I would go with escaping from something. Honestly, I think you'll find that escaping a threat is a much more effective way of dealing with any kind of situation. So go with an escape. So create a monster or creature of your own, and then once you've done that, have that pursue them. It could be as simple as they're traveling from one location to another, and give them a fake adventure hook. Maybe their job is, just as you said, that they have to clear out a dungeon. But as they're traveling to that dungeon, the real story takes place while they're trying to get to the dungeon. Yeah, maybe whether it be to find an ancient artifact or a special item, the real threat is what takes place as they try to travel there. I think that's the one you want to go for, because you give them an open area to try to escape from. They don't know which way to go. They can go north, south, east, west. And remember, don't show them the monster or creature or the threat straight away. Use the mist. Use darkness. Use all the things that will hide and disguise what you are presenting against them. Okay? That would be my suggestion to you. I don't know if that's enough information for what you want. I don't want to give you too much, because I feel like, make it your own. Hunter becomes the hunted. Yes, that's a very... It's a popular trope, so it works well. Okay, I think this is a good time for me to have a drink of water and finish up, because you guys are going to go and watching Critical Role very shortly, I'm sure, or some of you will be. So, look, wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, afternoon, night, or early morning, look after your family and your friends and yourself, and hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.